I actually grew up in Philadelphia, so I'm maybe a little more bombastic than some California winemakers.
Yeah.
Grew up in Philly, went to college in Boston in the 70s. And as you might or might not know, the drinking age was 18 in those days. This was the mid 70s, like I said, in Massachusetts. And I started drinking Burgundies, turned on to me by my older brother, who still lives in Maine, in the early and mid 70s. So I got into wine just because I loved that combination of hedonism. He turned me on to a lot of other things in those days, but wine's pretty much the one I mostly still do. And climb mountains up in New Hampshire and Vermont and Maine. After I graduated college, I actually got a degree in chemistry and philosophy, a double major at a place called Brandeis in Boston. I moved west mostly to play outdoors. I lived in Utah for a while as a ski bum, Colorado as a ski bum. And then I started to go to grad school in physics at University of Utah. Actually, they have a great program in chemical physics there. Slowly moved west, got a fellowship to study chemistry at UC Berkeley. And that's where I started to learn about the California wine industry a little bit. That was 1980. I was working in Berkeley and going up visiting Napa Valley. My first wines that I loved in California were from, and still are, many of my favorite wines in California from Napa Valley. I don't know, Schaefer Winery started, Schaefer Hillside, as you all probably know, started in 1978. And I remember in 1981 having the first Schaefer cab. I'm like, oh, this California wine's pretty good. And as I started visiting more and thinking, I don't like, working in a lab, and I didn't really want to go where most of my friends from Berkeley were going, I kind of branched out a little, worked at UCSF Medical School for a while, thinking maybe I'll do what my good Jewish mommy in California, in Philadelphia wants me to do and become a doctor. That didn't look like fun either. So I ended up going back to school at UC Davis in grad school in enology in 1985. I graduated in 86. I worked actually in 85. I took a semester off and worked at Mondavi. I worked at Schramsberg for a couple of years, actually 4 years. Worked in Portugal for them, spent 2 years in Portugal. I got back and there was a job at a little winery called La Crema at that point. And at that point, La Crema was not owned by Jess Jackson. It was owned by a guy in New York. We won't go into all the details. And in the early 90s, that would have been 1991. 1990 actually is my first vintage at La Crema. Nobody cared about the Russian River Valley in terms of winemaking. Everybody thought it was too cold for still wines, and all the grapes being grown out here were either for sparkling wine, if it was Pinot Noir, or Chardonnay that was mostly blended into things like Sebastiani and some Central Valley wineries to bump the acidity in cheaper wines from the Central Valley. During that time, my favorite grower, actually, as we started to grow, and I won't go into all the details, but La Crema went into bankruptcy, and probably my greatest education of a winemaker was running a bankrupt company for 2 years. Wow. You learn that what matters is cleanliness, is the quality of your vineyards, and attention to detail. When Jess Jackson bought La Crema out of bankruptcy in 1993, I was the winemaker. He kept me on. And as we grew and as I learned my craft really through Jess's caring about quality wines, I discovered a little grower, a relatively large grower in this neighborhood named Warren Dutton. Over the years, every time we did a tasting at the KJ Central facility up here in Windsor in Sonoma County, blind, the Pinot Noirs and the Chards from Russian River Valley kind of kicked butt. And a lot of my job was to get vineyards planted for La Crema in those days. And that was a great pleasure, and still one of my great pleasures, and without a doubt, in winemaking, is exploring our neighborhood, exploring little nooks and crannies of the neighborhood, and getting people to either farm in a way that, that really works for the wines I love, or to plant vineyards, and that's less so now because it's more discovered, to plant vineyards in places I think are spectacular. Right. The Dutton family did a lot of work with La Crema, and actually we started Hartford Court with one of the Dutton vineyards, with Dutton Sanchetti, and later the Rued Vineyard. And Steve and I became friends. La Crema grew from what was 20,000 cases when Jess first bought it to quite large, 250,000 or more when I left, and it's quite a bit larger now, most likely, or undoubtedly. I decided that as the winery grew, that I really didn't want to have to choose between becoming an executive versus a craftsperson. And Steve and I started Dutton-Goldfield in 1998. The KJ folks are still great friends. I have great admiration for those wineries. And our neighborhood is really cohesive. We learn from each other. Steve Dutton's background, of course, is completely different. He's fifth generation farmer. His people have grown hops, and there he is. You tell who's the farmer there, the big guy, as opposed to the wimpy little winemaker. They've grown hops, they've grown peaches, they've grown pears, they grew row crops when he was a kid. They had a farm stand on Sebastopol Avenue, and his dad, Warren Dutton, who sadly passed away in 1991, I'm sorry, in 2001. I apologize, in 2001. Was the first to plant grapes in the family. He bought a piece of land here on Grayton Road, just 2 miles from where we're standing right now, that had 20 acres of French Colombard on it. He was wondering what to grow next or what he should try. He actually went to Rodney Strong, who said, why don't you try Chardonnay? So the first Chardonnay that the Duttons planted in this neighborhood was planted in 1967, which happens to be the year that Steve Dutton was born, actually the year 10 years before I was born, and it grew from there. The Duttons now farm 1,100 acres, a little over, about 1,150 acres of grapes, and still grow, thank goodness, 250 acres of organic apples as well. Wow. Like I said, Steve's fifth generation farmer. He and his brother Joe run the array of vineyards. They actually farm 85 completely separate, non-contiguous vineyards. It's kind of Burgundian in that way. And they also have a sixth generation now. Steve has 2 children and Joe has 3.
Oh, cool.
Was that good for 2? So the Dutton-Goldfield story, just real quickly, I should give you that. And several things we're proud of is, well, number one, I'm not a family member of the Duttons. Dutton-Goldfield is completely separate from Dutton Ranch. We buy all our grapes at full price at normal terms. But what we do get is kind of my first choice on long-term contracts of vineyards I love. That said, there's a lot of spectacular vineyards, and also different people like different styles. I like the coldest places. I don't like high alcohols. I tend to like wines that are wines from grapes that are older, which are a little harder to farm. A lot of people don't like that. They like more homogeneity than a lot of the older vineyards give. So we buy probably 7 different Chardonnay ranches from the Duttons, 12 different Pinot Noir ranches, and they're all broken down into separate little lots. And Dutton-Goldfield has no obligation to buy only that's from Steve's mother's house up looking down at the main Dutton Ranch in the valley, right below where I live as well. It's called Purrington Creek. I do buy fruit, or we do buy fruit from several other places. In Green Valley, there's really no reason to buy from other people than the Duttons. On the other hand, I spend a lot of time playing in the hills. I love to bike ride. So we have some amazing vineyards up on the Sonoma coast where Steve doesn't grow grapes, a place called Redwood Ridge Vineyard that's up in Annapolis, another vineyard that actually Steve planted but no longer farms up in the Fort Ross Seaview appellation called McDougall Vineyard. I also have an old friend who Steve has helped quite a bit, named Mark Pasternak, owns a vineyard in Marin County. And you probably don't know much about grapes in Marin County, but it's cold, windswept, right off the ocean north of San Francisco. And we get some really, really wonderful Pinot Noir from Devil's Gulch Vineyard in Marin. And a little more from old friends. Little by little, I've been doing this for 35 or 37 or whatever the hell it is years now. And little by little, you gain loves for singular pieces of ground for certain humans who love where they live and bring out what I admire in a particular place for grape growing in our part of the world. Probably our biggest pride in many ways, or our biggest focus as a winery, is that we are independent, we are family owned, we never have any designs on selling the winery anywhere out of Sonoma County. Actually, Steve will know, who knows, but it will say either in our family or local people who we do business with in Sonoma County. Right. It's very important to us. If you look around, whether it's Bordeaux, Burgundy, Sonoma, Napa, the number of wineries who have people's names on the label where the people whose names are on the label actually have anything to do with it anymore is extremely low. Yeah. We're family owned, we're family run. We love that level of independence because we love the individuality of the little nooks and crannies of our neighborhood. And the only way to really perpetuate that is to keep the local family strong and to keep the independence of these little pieces of earth. Like when I worked in Portugal, you know, you can live, or you go to France or Italy, and the little guys, especially, you know, up on the hillsides in Italy, they'll say, the vineyards across that valley, they're not nearly as good as ours. You know, there's this local love of a little spot of earth. And I love that about Wines of the World, and it's certainly something I do my best to keep going in our part of the world.
No, and like you said, it's really rare at this point to have a small local family-owned winery at this point. You know, most of them have been absorbed and bought out. So we covered cool climates, family-owned. Give us a few other points that really separate Dutton-Goldfield, your philosophy, from other producers in Sonoma.
Well, I think given our size and our connection to our part of the world, we make what we like to drink. And I don't know if that's good or bad. It's just my rudder. So I grew up, you know, you never taste like anybody else. So I grew up on Burgundies, and I have great love for Barolos, and I love Austrian wines. I like wines with grip. I like wines with focus. I like wines with high acid and relatively lower alcohols. There's nothing moral about it. There's nothing right or wrong. But I think we're a little out of what's become the norm, even though people talk about it. We tend to choose our vineyards from the coolest places, not because we think it's great to be colder, but I like lower alcohol wines, and obviously things ripen slower as you get closer to the coast. But that said, if you're picking Pinot Noir in August in order to get alcohols under 14 or 14 and a half, you're probably growing it in too warm a place. So you want to take full advantage of the long season we have. So as you get to the more marginal places out by the coast, you get longer hang time. You get wines with acidity and delicacy with still depth and complexity. So I would say what sets us apart, I don't know, there's a lot of great winemakers around here. I wouldn't diss any of my great friends. But it's maybe attention to detail and focus on making what we think represents that piece of earth, as opposed to the ego of what I think tastes best. Our Chardonnays tend to come from the oldest, coldest vineyards, I like to say. So they're mostly on older rootstock, whether it's, believe it or not, we have quite a bit of AXR left in the sandier soils, but also St. George, a lot of dry farm vines, and we're kind of proud of that. As you probably know, grapes are a crop that loves to grow in drier places. So all the talk about water and the important talk about water conservation, that in reality, if you have the right grapes on the right piece of earth, very little or even no watering is absolutely a possibility. So our Rouge Chardonnay, our Walker Chardonnay, many of the vineyards that go into the Dutton Ranch that have up there, are completely dry farm, because you have sandy soils on top, a little bit of clay 3 to 5 feet down. And once those vines get into the clay layer, one good rain a year completely recharges that. Pinots, again, we like to be up the hillsides a little bit on the Pinot. We love to pick Pinots with I don't know if delicacy is the right word, but in places that grow in a way that you get the depth of color and the depth of flavor without needing big, high alcohol, overly chunky wines. And again, it's all a matter of what you like to drink. It's not that one thing is right or wrong. I do think we have a tremendous attention to detail and kind of pride in craftsmanship. If anybody was to ask me what I love about what I do, it's about the kind of the love of taking a deep breath and thinking about what the wines want and kind of crafting things one thing at a time. Once you do something, you can't take it back. Yeah. So it's like climbing mountains, which is also something I love to do, is when in doubt, stop and think about it. The best craftsman knows when to do nothing, which isn't very easy.
Yeah, it's much easier to fiddle with things. It's much tougher to leave them alone. I want to switch gears to discuss a few wines. So Obviously, your most well-known labels are the Dutton Ranch, the Chardonnay, and the Pinot Noir. So tell us just a bit about those wines, how they're crafted, and how that's different and a different philosophy from your single vineyard projects.
Great question. For us, the Dutton Ranch wines are the wines that represent Green Valley of the Russian River Valley, which is really our home in that particular vintage. When you plant, each neighborhood, and of course, I'm putting by definition, I'm putting my opinion on these things, but each neighborhood where you grow grapes, whether it's in Russian River or Von Romane or Barbaresco, has a character that it gives to its grapes, either red or white. Everything you grow, in Russian River, it really is all about the fruit. We do retain acidity very well here because of the very cold nights. But the Chardonnays at their best have this kind of lemon cream pie. You have this kind of focus of high acid, citrus, and apple fruit that enables you to do a lot of winemaking that might be too interventionalist in other places, but just gives a nice rounding to the wineries in a cooler, kind of longer hang time place like the Russian River Valley. So all our Chardonnays are 100% barrel fermented, for better or for worse. We go through malolactic with all of our Chardonnays, not because we like the lower acid, but the going through ML does a couple of things. Number one, it enables you not to have to membrane filter your wines. At best, we won't filter them at all. But if it's not clear, we'll go through a very loose pad because the haze in wine tends to be bitter. It's protein tannin complexes. So they're all barrel fermented. But if you notice wood as a primary component, then I've done my job poorly. Wood to me is a framing on the wine, like a setting on a stone, so to speak, as opposed to something that's supposed to be central to it. We stir the lees every 2 weeks after primary is finished, and then every month, depending on how the wine is developing. So the Dutton Ranch, like we have the 18 as our current release. It was a year with really good acidity. It was a really long year. It was a pretty substantial crop. So there's great focus, great brightness, great kind of lemon cream pie, almost pina colada character to the 18 Chard. And that's what we like to bring out. The Dutton Ranch Chardonnays and both Dutton Ranch wines are bottled just before the next harvest. So they're about 10 months in barrel, whereas all of the single vineyard wines, including the Chardonnays, are bottled somewhere in the spring the year later. So they tend to be 17 to 20 months in barrel, depending on how they taste and how crazy my life is at the time. Dutton Ranch Pinot, and I talk about characteristics of places. Like you think of Chardonnay, in Santa Barbara, you always get these beautiful, really tropical natures, and almost everything you plant and white down there tends to give this tropicality to it. Here it's more lemon cream, the lemony, the citrus, the green apple. Pinot Noir in our neighborhood is all about bowls of berries. In warmer years, it tends to be more blackberry, more darker fruits. In cooler years, it tends to go to more towards, and of course in core vineyard sites, tends to be more red fruits, strawberry and cranberry and Bing cherry. But it's really about that bright fruit. It doesn't tend to be as naturally animal or mushroomy as places, say, like Marin County or places in Oregon. And that's neither good nor bad. It's just the nature of our neighborhood, and that's what we like to bring out in our Pinots. All the Pinots are open top fermented. Excuse me. The choice of wood is incredibly important, of course. We tend to mix it up according to the vineyard. And like I said, the Dutton Ranch, we kind of choose to bring out that bright fruit, not necessarily early drinking, because all of our wines will last quite a long time. Actually, I just had a 2003 Rude Vineyard Chardonnay about a week ago now that was showing perfectly. So just like almost any great region of the world, the right wines from the right years in our hands, I feel, will last 10 to 20 years from vintage. That said, the Dutton Ranch wines are definitely easier drinking early than the single vineyard wines, partially because we bottled them earlier, and partially just the vineyards we choose for those wines. Single vineyards, how do you put it? The obligation, so to speak, of a single vineyard wine is to be idiosyncratic, is to be uniquely different. If it's just a great Russian River Pinot, it's going to go into the Dutton Ranch Pinot blend. It's not just that it needs to be great, it has to be a little bit different, all in and of itself. So our Foxden vineyard is in Green Valley, but it's way up on the hill. It's really sandy soil. The potassium is extremely low in that vineyard, so it ripens extremely slowly and has very high acidity for California Pinot Noirs that we bottle by itself. And it takes a little longer to come around in the barrel. It tends to be lower alcohol, higher acidity than our other Pinots. And when you have that combination, it extracts wood relatively slowly because alcohol is a solvent, of course, so the higher the alcohol you have, the more wood it shows.
Right.
And the higher acidity or lower pH that you have, the more slowly it extracts wood, and also the less it seems to show in the aromatics. So you adapt your winemaking accordingly. I think, and then you go up to, say, the Sonoma Coast, where we have our Redwood Ridge vineyard up in Annapolis, where it's at 1,100 feet of elevation. The sun intensity is extremely high. The tannins are kind of burly for Pinot, obviously,
right,
not for Syrah or Cabernet. And you make that accordingly. You might use a little more whole cluster, or you might, vary it to either mitigate or bring out that burliness according to the particular vintage. In a warmer year, you might back off a little bit. In a colder year, you might be a little more aggressive in the winemaking. I think the key to any craft is to never, and whether it's business or cabinet making or building rocket ships, is to never think you really know what you're doing. Every year brings something different. There's an infinite number of variables in making wine. And of course, you're learning from everything you do, and keeping data and keeping notes and kind of analyzing it continually, but then you close your eyes and you make your best guess. And if you think you're going to make it the same way every year, you might as well, as far as I'm concerned, find yourself a new job. It's all about that attention to the individuality of each vineyard in each vintage, and kind of crafting the wine accordingly. That's the fun of it, as well as what drives you crazy.
Well, exactly. But you're so lucky to have these long-term contracts and this, this long-term partnership with Steve Dutton, so that you have these same vineyard sites and you get to know them, and you can, even though the vintage changes, you at least know the sites and you have an idea of your head of where it's going.
Absolutely.
I wanted to switch gears because obviously you're most known for your Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs, but you also produce some spectacular Syrah, which we stock as well. So tell us a bit about the Syrah and that story.
Oh, great. Well, good. I'm glad, because everybody loves the Syrah, but nobody seems to want to sell it. We love making it. As you know, Syrah is, the grape of Northern Rhone primarily. And if you've been in Northern Rhone, it's rocky, nasty soils and things ripen slowly, and they're not huge high alcohol wines, right?
Yeah.
And in California, one of the bugaboos of making Syrah is there's no icons for it. There's no, what a coupe would be mine, honestly. But people think of some Syrahs are 17% alcohol. Many of the Napa Valley Syrahs. Where we grow Syrah is in a very cold place for Syrah in California. It tends to be in that mold. And again, you never taste like anybody else. But I admire the structural nature of the Northern Rhone wines. You want it to be a little leaner. And when you grow it around here, we're growing in places where we're not picking till mid-October. And I think that's important, because in reality, all crops respond to day length just as much as so-called heat summation. It's not how hot it is and how much sun it gets. It's also, you hit the autumnal equinox, and the grapes notice the day length getting shorter. So the perfect place to plant grapes is where, just as the year is waning and the vines are shutting down because the year is waning, is when the grapes are perfectly ripe. And growing Syrah in Western Sonoma County, in what I call the proverbial hot, warm spot in a cold neighborhood, really brings out that kind of white pepper, really great color, because Syrah is always great color, because the acidity is higher, really kind of dense flavors to it. So our Syrah is fully 2 years in barrel, or just under 2 years. We bottle it just before 2 harvests later than it was picked. There's a combination of balance and density that I really like in our Syrah. Like I said, it's not an easy sell in the world, but when people come in the tasting room, they really love it. And I have to say, a lot of people who want cab because they think they need to have cab for a big steak.
Right.
Really, in many occasions, in many, certainly for equal price point, would rather have a Syrah if they were drinking it blind.
I agree with you 100%. Unfortunately, you're right. It's not as popular as I wish it was. But a lot of times, some of the most exciting wines that I try in Sonoma are many times Syrah, which is pretty unusual. But it's
Right.
for those out there who haven't had the Dutton-Goldfield Syrah, definitely check it out. You know, we stock always have full stock on the Dutton Ranch Chardonnays and Pinot Noirs and several single vineyard Pinot Noirs. So it's really you know, and not that I always follow the raters and the reviewers, but they seem to love your wines every year. So it's that doesn't hurt it either. Is that every single year consistent 92s, 94s, 95s on almost every single bottling that we carry. So it's whatever you're doing, it's working. So keep it up.
Thank you.
But we are running short on time, so I just want to thank you again, Dan, for your time. I also want to tell people to check out your website because I manage our website, and your website is really spectacular. A lot of great information on there, videos of you know, walking people through the winemaking process, and a really great
bike riding suggestions in Sonoma County.
Yeah, see, even bike riding suggestions.
And that, I have nothing to do with our website other than giving some content and marketing BS. That would be Valerie, who you know well. And when you reach out to Dutton-Goldfield, it's going to be Valerie or Brittany who responds, and will usually get me involved if information only I have is needed. But we're a small winery. And one of the things we love about our company, and hate on occasion because we're all working a little harder than we might like at this point, is that it's a small group of people who gives a shit about what we're doing. And that's kind of, you know, who we are in the world.
Dan, thank you again for everything. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll sign off for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.